So the question for you now is to find a price for the pharmaceutical company that will maximize profits. And then more important for us today, what is the markup of that price? Okay, so I think that this problem will take maybe 3 minutes to answer, and then people come back together to consider whether or not this price is exorbitant from the point of view of society. That is it too high for the government to permit to occur? Okay, 3 minutes to find the price and the markup of the price as opposed to marginal cost. And then we will reconvene. Thank you. Okay, good. So what have you found out about the profit maximizing price for this pharmaceutical company? Remembering our formula for the price, which is equal to the marginal cost divided by a term that involves the inverse of the demand elasticity. But the first thing that we need is an estimate of marginal cost. But the only information that we have is that the average cost of a dose is somewhere between 30 and 40 cents per dose. So how can we infer marginal cost in this example from our very scanty data? But here's one possibility. We can assume that the production cost is constant over the feasible range of production. So in other words, even though we may increase production a lot, the cost per dose remains between 30 and 40 cents. So, on average, we have an average cost of 35 cents per dose. So I took the midpoint of our range of costs from 30 to 40 cents. The average cost. So here's a question for you. If average cost is a constant over production, what must be the marginal cost as it relates to average cost?
It is zero, maybe.
The marginal cost,
Is zero.
what would it be? What would it be zero in this case?
It will be a straight line.
Good, huh? In fact, we can assume that if average cost is constant, and if that's implied, then marginal cost is a constant as well. The proposal of the whites proposed that marginal cost had been higher than average cost. Then the higher marginal cost of a call it MC could then pull up the average cost because the most recent doses in production are within the average. In other words, in that case, average cost can not be a constant. So in that case, we have a graph for average and marginal cost of production that looks like this, and these look like this. Here's average cost, and then we assume that marginal cost is higher than average cost. They look like that. So in that case, that the recent production of doses is pulling up the average of the entire range of production. but we have assumed that that is not the case, that instead average cost is a constant of 35 cents per dose over the range of production. And therefore, since multiple cost is not an increasing or decreasing average cost, multiple cost must be a constant equal to average cost. So in our graph, we can infer that average cost is equal to multiple cost. And that is our estimate of multiple costs that we need to have to arrive at the price. Multiple cost is equal to 35 cents. So the remainder of the problem is very easy for us to calculate. In the numerator, we have multiple costs that in this case is 35 cents per dose, and then divided by a denominator that reflects the demand elasticity for this drug. Or 1 plus 1 over minus 1.1 is elasticity. So let's to make the problem triple, let's rewrite the denominator as 1 minus 1 divided by 1.1. So all that I have done is to make this time easier to understand. All right. Now, let's take the first term in the denominator and multiply both its numerator and denominator by 1.1.
Professor, excuse me.
Go ahead.
May inquire, in this case, the average cost is constant in this problem.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
That's what you're assuming. Because we don't have very much data about the problem. But we are given that the cost of adults is somewhere between 30 and 40 cents on average. That's the average cost. But if the average cost is not changing with an increase in the level of production, then average cost must be equal to marginal cost, because the marginal cost is neither raising or lowering the average cost. That's the idea.
Thank you, Professor.
So for an example, suppose that you have a grade of 90% on the midterm. On the first midterm, and a grade of 100% on the second midterm. Then marginal cost, or the marginal grade in this case, only two midterms, the marginal grade is 100%. Higher than the average test score of 90%. So the average grade was right in this case. Versus from 90%. This was the average grade because you had only one test up to this point. Up to the average of 90% plus 100% divided by 2, or 95%. In short, the high marginal grade basis to average grade. But if on the other hand, the proof that on the second midterm, the grade had been 90%. Second midterm grade is the same as the first midterm grade. So the average midterm grade is 90%. The average is equal to 90% plus 90% divided by 2, which of course is 90%. So if your average grade remains constant as you take more and more tests, it must be equal to the marginal grade. That's the idea. which is indeed the case, because the second grade was 90%. And the second midterm is the most recent midterm. So it is the marginal midterm. Okay, so that's the idea in this case. So in our example of the drug price, remember that this is not the cost divided by 1 minus 1.1, 1 divided by 1.1. And we have calculated that the marginal cost being equal to the average cost is 35 cents. And then divided into the denominator by 1.1 divided by 1.1, the same as 1 minus 1 over 1.1. So all that I've done is to de-express this first number as 1.1 divided by 1.1. So in the denominator, we have 0.1 divided by 1.1. Or multiplying both sides of this fraction in the denominator by 10, 1 over 11. Which means that the price that maximizes profits in this case is 35 cents times 11. Or 385, I think. Okay, so far. So I multiplied 35 cents by 10 and then multiplied it again by 1 for a summation of 11 times 35 cents. So the profit maximizing price in this case is $3.85 per dose. The price, not the marginal cost. So the actual cost of the drug, the actual price in the real world for this anti-opioid drug was $3.50. So the drug company is very, very close to maximizing profits. Since it is charging a price of $3.50, almost as high as a profit maximizing price of $3.85.
Excuse me, Professor.
Now, go ahead.
Was the actual price given in the
Yes.
text? It
Yes,
was given.
Yes.
Thank you.
I think it did check it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, $3.50 per dose is the actual price.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
It's a good question. So, second question is, what is the markup in this case for the drug price? That is, how does the price that maximizes profits relate to marginal cost? So let's see, you have the price equals marginal cost divided by the term that refers to demand elasticity, called an E. So in this case, we can express the markup as price divided by marginal cost. Using a formula, price divided by marginal cost is equal to 1 divided by the denominator expression of 1 plus 1 over E. And we've already seen that E in this case, the elasticity is minus 1.1. And we have found that that is equal to 11 in this case. So the markup is the ratio of first marginal cost minus 1, or equal to 10 in this case. That is, the markup is 1,000%. Believe it or not. And so it is understandable that people taking drugs complain about high drug prices all the time. The price is high because the elasticity of demand is very low. People have got to have the drug, and therefore they're willing to pay a very high price for the drug. And that was the point of this case study. But overall, I hope that this is a way from this example is how to calculate the markup. The markup is price over multiple cost minus one. Just the concentrated on the increase in the price that is suggested the profit maximization. And so that is just one divided by one plus one over E. And that's all that there is in this particular case study. Okay, any questions so far about how to determine the profit maximizing price and the markup of that price with respect to marginal cost? Okay, good. And there is the summary of our discussion. I will put the PowerPoint slides on the middle page at the end of class today. And finally, there is the markup in this case. Okay, so our question now is whether we should be outraged by the high price of drugs that are essential to good health. In this case, there is a monopoly that is producing the drug, and therefore a price that is much higher than would occur in a competitive market. So I will give you a moment to read through the slide for the background of monopoly in the post-Soviet states. These are just two examples of monopolies that remain in Russia on natural gas exports and steel bank. This we also have in Kazakhstan. Both organizations have been very close to being true monopolies, although there is some competition now for their stuff. Okay. So let's look in general at the monopoly problem for society rather than for just the one consumer of drugs. We already know that the profit maximizing price is higher than the price that would be charged in the competitive industry. So let's analyze this problem in terms of a simple example. And we might as well stick to our example of the drug company. So there is a demand function for the drug produced by a monopoly. And then, as you remember, the marginal revenue for the monopoly has the same intercept as demand, but is twice as steep as the demand function. So there is marginal cost. And then for this marginal revenue. For simplicity, let us assume a constant marginal cost. Okay, so in the graph, how will we determine the price that the drug monopoly is charging? But we remember that the company will pick the level of production that replace marginal cost to marginal revenue. In the graph, it is first right here. So I would denote that as 30 million doses. And then express price in cost in thousands of changes. So the marginal cost in my example is 6,020. But the price that maximizes profits is much higher than that. $10,020, let us say. And then finally, at the price then multiple cost of 6,020, people would have bought a lot more of the drug. But to say 70 million doses. Okay, so in short, the monopoly is charged in this case 10,000 penny per dose. And produce 50 million doses. But had been said had perfect competition. Then the price must equal multiple cost because that is the lowest price possible without losing money. In 2020, output in that case would be 70 million doses. So the competitive outcome occurs right here. And the monopoly outcome occurs right here. So let's take a look at what the monopoly is costing society in general. Just note that under the monopoly, the price is 10,000 KD. Although the cost is only 6,000 KD. So how much money is the monopoly making in this case? What do you think? For 1 point of extra credit. Well, let's see. In this case, average cost is equal to marginal cost because it is constant. So the average cost AC in this case is 6,000 tenge. So on any dose, the monopoly is making a profit of price minus average cost. That is receiving a price of 10,000 tenge when it sells one more dose. And then after the 10,000 tenge has to cover the cost of production. The cost of production is 6,000 tenge for a typical dose. The total profit for the monopolist is the markup on the average dose times total output. So in this case, total profit is 4,000 tenge times 50 million doses. That's 4 times 10 to the power 3. Times 50 million, a million is 10 to the power 6. For 120 times 10 to the power 9, or 127 tenge. So in the graph, the total profit is this rectangle right here. So this represents a markup of 4,000 tenge for each and every dose that is produced. There are 50 million doses overall. So there is the profit. But this is not to do is this, is the profit of social cost of the monopoly. And what do you think? From the usual point of view, of economics is a profit alone a bad idea.
No, it is not a cost to society, because a cost to society is higher. Society pays higher cost than monopoly earns, like higher opportunity cost.
Okay, so this, I agree that the key to the problem is opportunity cost. This that is well taken, well expressed. So profit to say is not a social cost. It is just a transfer payment from drug patients, drug consumers to the drug company. It does not necessarily affect how much is produced directly. Just a transfer payment is that's all. And so, as you might suggest, the social cost at least just the fact that the monopoly produces less than the competitive market. In this case, the monopoly is producing 40 million, 40 million dollars less than the competitive market. This is a cost to society if society would value those 40 million dollars over the cost of production. Right. So we know that society wants to have 17 million doses rather than just 30 million that would be provided by the monopoly. So are those additional doses valuable enough to produce? So let's see. The demand function in this case is reflecting the marginal value of the drug to society. So, for example, for dose number 17 million, society is willing to pay 6,000 tenge to have that dose. This is the cost of production. Now, on all the other doses, from 50 million to 70 million, society is willing to pay a higher price than the cost of production. For example, there is the 50 million votes so that those people are willing to pay 8,000 tenge. Since the dose carries a value that is higher than the cost of production, that dose has net value for society and therefore should be provided. So in general, if we measure the marginal value of the drug in terms of the highest price that people are willing to pay for that dose. Or marginal value. It's the highest price for that level of production. If it exceeds the cost, the marginal cost of production, then we should prevent a dose. The problem with a monopoly is that it does not provide that additional dose. It provides not 17 million doses, but instead only 13 million doses. So the total cost is the net value of production not provided. Then indeed the value is greater than cost. In this case, the social cost is represented by the triangular area here. I'm looking for an easy way to show this to you. I can't quite do it with the graphics. So let me describe it over here. That point is A. This point here is B. And then finally through point C. That triangular area. So you notice that for every dose, the marginal value is higher than the production cost. So we suffer a big loss when we don't provide those 40 million additional doses. The value of the additional dose is greater than the marginal cost. And therefore, as Navai says, the big loss is the true social cost. So in short, the payment to the monopoly on existing production is not the social cost. It's just a transfer payment. And that is the summary of our discussion. There is the social cost. For every dose in this range, the marginal value, which is stated by the demand function, is higher than the marginal cost. Because those additional 40 million doses have net value that are not being produced. The triangle represents the total cost of a monopoly. Okay, so why don't you take a moment now for a print of extra credit to estimate the total cost in this case. So for this problem, and then we'll come back together as a class to look at your solution. Two minutes, and then people reconvene. Thank you.
Professor, it is
Uh-huh.
80. It is 80. If we take the simple numbers, it is 80 overall. The square of this triangle, ABC.
But not the sphere, but the area, yes.
Yes, sorry, area of this triangle, 80.
Good, okay. So the T of the area of the triangle, as you guys suggest, look to be that triangle. Is 1/2 times the length times the height. So in this case, the area is 0.5 times the length, or 30 million. And then the height is from 10 to 6, or 2,000 kg. So let's see, this gives us, oh, I'm sorry. $2,000 thinking. To 10 to the power of 9. So if you doesn't take it, and this is the solution to the problem. So here's another question for you to consider for next time. Have you really checked the social cost of the monopoly, then we ignore the transfer payment. After all, the transfer occurs from poor consumers to rich stockholders. This is the inverse of Robin Hood. The rich are robbing the poor. Should we not take into account the impact of the transfer payment on the distribution of income? There is no answer to that question. I just wish it for you to think about. And that is the end of class for today. So the main point that I hope you bring from the discussion is that the social loss is comparing value to cost. If value exceeds cost, but you're not providing that production, you have a loss to society. And that it is for today.